Harvey, want anything special for your birthday?
Just a decent cup of coffee.
You're kidding.
I'm serious. Honey, your coffee's undrinkable.
It's pretty harsh.
Well, so's your coffee.
And he didn't even kiss me goodbye. You know, if I could just make a decent cup of coffee, I could relax. So, relax.
Hello and welcome to my Model Corner Project 36. In this video, we concentrate on a model of the EA-6B Prowler manufactured by Kinetic. This aircraft had a service history that spanned 50 years, and during this installment we'll provide information on this land and carrier-based jet while taking a look at the VMAQ-2 Marine Squadron in particular. This unit had a distinguished military career, but its story was also marked by tragic accidents and controversy. This undertaking will be our second Kinetic model build for the channel, and it isn't without its problems and eccentricities. As with our previous Kinetic kit, the E2C Hawkeye, I would not recommend this model to a beginner, nor a medium-skilled hobbyist such as myself looking for a relatively hassle-free project. We'll note various faults as they occur during the build, such as incorrect part callouts in the instructions and bad fits at various times.
The job of the Prowler is saving lives, ships, and aircraft. Improvements in the system have kept up with the rapidly expanding technology of electronic warfare. Today's Prowler will continue to be the most powerful and versatile electronic warfare aircraft in the skies, serving both the United States Navy and Marine Corps.
Right off the bat, there are some oversights to disclose about this kit. The parts inventory calls for a sprue designated as Charlie Charlie, and this tree is not actually contained in the box. However, there are two arrays of identical sprues included in this kit with no identifying letter tab. It is basically listed as 00143002 with lots of extra unrelated pieces of munitions, but they do contain the missile parts that we would have needed from the missing Charlie Charlie sprue. Let's begin cutting and preparing some of the bigger parts before working the crew stations of the front and rear cockpits. There is a layer of lubricant on some of the parts similar in consistency to cooking oil, necessitating the need to soak some of the pieces in warm soapy water to remove this substance before working with these components. Since this particular build concerns a Prowler characteristic of the 1978 time period, we need to remove the molded slime lights on the fuselage sides, as they did not exist as a regular feature and hadn't yet become all the rage as we know them today on military aircraft. Kinetic produces a number of different Prowler kits, and so it is understandable from a manufacturer's perspective that this individual sprue tree is generic to all the versions they generate. The offending slime lights are masked off to prevent accidental scoring by the sanding sticks to the surrounding areas. Starting with a coarse, low grit number and working our way to fine, higher grit numbers, we slowly remove the surplus plastic. One thing to mention before we begin with the main project proper is that some colors Kinetic lists on the paint index are never mandated in the instructions, and conversely a couple of the desired colors mentioned in the manual's construction stages are not listed on that index. Now that we have gotten that out of the way, let's dive into some of the finer details, specifically the cockpits. There are no photo etch parts in this kit, and this is disappointing as there are no lap or shoulder belts for the ejection seats, nor are any molded into the cushions. This should be a fairly basic feature for any aircraft model containing a cockpit. We'll have to scratch build the harnesses or come up with something else. We have count them, four ejection seats to make on this build. As always, we set up paint palettes to production line some of the collective painting tasks, saving some time. For these particular palettes, a black enamel primer coat is sprayed on while taking advantage of the outdoors lighting and weather. We'll utilize the black paint already laid down for the avionics panel faceplates in the cockpits by masking them off. Starting with the cockpit's tub already primed with enamel black, we'll apply the main gray color. Once we remove the masking, we'll scrape away at the black to bring back the gray plastic color for the control knobs and buttons. Returning our attention to the ejection seats, color is first added to the cushions. For the metal portions of the seats, we scrape away some of the black paint to simulate wear, and this also creates highlights, bringing out the features. Using a little white paint, the tops of the seats are dry brushed via another approach to detail these areas. We'll start adding the padding to the ejection seats now. After applying some wash to create shadows and some grunge, it's time to address the shoulder harnesses and lap belts' deficiency of no photo etch. Trying something new here, actual images of ejection seats were printed and reduced to match the model's 1/48th scale. The belts were then cut out, and the harnesses for each seat were positioned differently to create a realism of individuality. CA glue was employed to affix all the tiny belts. This is the first pass of painting the bands on the loops. These usually need touch-ups whenever I work these. Next, the bulkheads of the cockpits are detailed with some finer paint applications and a wash. For the instrument panels, black paint is scraped away to reveal the supporting metal frames as well as create the gray of the knobs and buttons in the same manner as previously prepared for the avionics panels in the cockpit tubs. A gloss white is applied as a base coat for all the display screens in the crew compartments. The colors for the screens are placed on unevenly to give the impression that the phosphorus coating on these old type of CRT monitors are showing some slightly burned out spots. Let's put it all together. And here's an overview. Later on, we'll discover that this section wasn't actually fully complete as believed at this point. To finish it up, the glare shield is airbrushed and the sides of the cockpits on the fuselage are prepared. In order to continue, the nose gear bay and the arresting gear compartment have to be prepared prior to the mating of the fuselage halves. To keep things moving and create a sense of progress for myself, the landing gear, the doors, the tires and hubs, and the hook were also completed as far as possible to the point of near installation to our Prowler aircraft model. We'll hit the various tires for the aircraft and the support vehicle. Even though there are more steps to put the wheels together, I prefer this setup since the lines between the black tires and the white hubs are strictly defined compared to trying to carefully paint perfect circles on one-piece molded tires. There are lots of little details to add to the parts as we get them ready. Adding the red paint by hand to these edges inevitably lead to touch-ups as you'll see some glitches here and there, but we'll get it done. Detail washes are one of the simple but great techniques that add to your model's appearance. Even the earliest of beginners can make their projects look better with this method. Almost forgot this door. We even have some small specification placard decals to apply to all three of the gear struts. We've reached the stage where enough parts are completed to allow us to bond the fuselage together. The nose gear bay engineering for this model is unusual and requires an early installation of the doors as compared to other kits. It's also a little fiddly. This lower strip of the fuselage did not fit precisely and ended up being one of the more time-consuming portions of the build to compensate for this flaw. These are just some miscellaneous housekeeping clips showing the work for other steps in our landing gear work that really don't require a specialized presentation. Although the components were mated flush to the right side fuselage against all the molded alignment ridges, the left side fuselage did not line up with our previously installed sections. The two halves had to be bonded a few inches at a time while also continually correcting the positions of the internal compartments at the same time. Some NATO black paint was airbrushed on to seek out any seamline work imperfections. In the last few model projects, we were tasked to build engine cores, although usually not visible once the aircraft was fully assembled. On this Prowler, all we have to accomplish are the very forward and aft ends of the power plants. There is just a little airbrushing and masking to start us off. Weathering powder of rust and soot colors are added to give the aft ducts a look of burns and other discoloration. A little detailing of the fan hubs and blade edges is performed with some hand brushing. Now the masking that protected the smooth white surfaces is removed from the forward intake parts. The forward portions of the engine air intakes were affixed one piece at a time per the instructions, but they could have been put together as a single unit prior to mounting them to the fuselage. Delta 8 is mistakenly listed as Delta 14 on the bottom radome. We'll add as many near flush mounted fuselage items as we can to help blend them in during the main bulk painting. The principal option to decide during construction is whether to do the folding wings or the wings fully extended display. As you can see, this Prowler will be wings out. Both wings needed extra pressure to mate and align them to the fuselage. The left wing was attached first, but the painting work required for the main gear bay in both the wing and fuselage portions had been missed. Some curative actions were employed to get the left side up to speed before tending to the right side wing. And the wash for the main gear base is caught up. Back to where we were, adding the wings. As that all sets up, let us get to our aircraft support vehicle. One nice feature of this model set is the addition of an NC-2A mobile electric power plant, or MEP. If desired, often such elements need to be scratch built or obtained as an aftermarket item which may or may not be available. I remember as a kid getting quality prizes at the bottom of our cereal boxes which could reward you with items such as a plastic car or even a miniature metal state license plate the size of a candy bar. So having this guaranteed accessory included in the bottom of this box is a welcome addition as well as a change of pace from our familiar process. We'll take our construction up to the point before we need to do some painting. The degree of the used look is always something for the modeler to ponder depending on personal taste and largely the composition they are aiming for. We'll do a foundation of black shading on the surfaces of our map for later transformation effects to include shadows, grime, and wear once we begin adding the main color coat. Although the box cover displays the map in white, the side of the box cover and the instructions show the main paint layer as gold, so that option is something to consider. I get messages from time to time on the channel that dirty aircraft, ships, and equipment are not realistic because the military keeps everything clean and shiny. I was in the US Armed Forces for 20 years, so my answer is, no. The trick here is to allow some of the black shading to peek through. Let your airbrush do the work. The hubs and tires didn't fit very well, so you'll have to do some sanding around the hubs or in the inner portion of the tires. There are a few small parts to install. It's always good to keep these pieces safely stored in a medicine bottle or something similar until they are ready to use. For the little round reflectors, we'll use a toothpick to dab some paint on. I originally used sky blue for the main lights, but I later changed it. All the tire sets were a little wobbly, so you'll have to make sure they're aligned properly. The decal sheet includes gold reflectors for your MEP. However, since we're painting our MEP white, we'll have to add in our own custom yellow strips. I reworked these a few times, so you may see a change over the course of the clips. There are multiple decals to add, and some are very small and don't adhere very well and need to be handled with extra care until the decal solution is applied. But they really do add to the total appearance. We apply some wash to add to the shadowing and enhance the finely molded details and modify the grime. Slowly but surely, our MEP takes on a new look. Finally, flat clear is airbrushed on the MEP to even everything out. I usually don't do automotive subjects, but I think this came out rather nicely. So as I was adding decals to our mobile support vehicle, I unexpectedly came across decal instructions for the ejection seats on the very last page of the instruction manual. My reaction at seeing this? These should have been noted at the time of construction of the cockpit parts. Now we'll have to go all the way to the very beginning of the project that I thought had already been completed. So I was thinking,
back to torpedoes again, Kusaka. More wasted time.
We'll have to carefully maneuver within very limited spaces to get these decals applied, as removing the seats would risk damage to the work already completed. There was also great fear that one of the decals would fall somewhere into the cockpit with any small accidental bad move. A total of 12 of the late seat decals were applied. These retractable ledges can be left open or closed. We'll close both this time. The manual recommends a 50-gram counterweight. I found this troublesome as the kit does not provide a white metal nose gear part or a central reinforcement rod to support this load. Leftover lead fishing sinkers from our E-2C Hawkeye build will function as our ballast. Hot glue will hold them in the radome, but there is not enough space, so one of the spheres is placed under the forward cockpit. On goes the nose radome, which will also close the little bit of fuselage halves we've been holding off on. The process of sealing up our aircraft in preparation for airbrushing starts with the cockpits. These outcroppings can be affixed early too, before painting. Since our final look of this Prowler won't be overly weathered and dirty, a gray primer is sprayed on. After the model sat for a day or two, it was time to start coloring it in. The leading edges of the wings were left exposed as masking tape was pressed on for our starting color. After removing the initial masking, we'll reverse the arrangement so that the red edging is now covered. Camouflage putty is rolled then pressed onto the sides of the aircraft to create a border for the colors as a baseline to start. Feathering along the boundary can be done afterwards. At the beginning of using the AK 3rd generation paints, there was some difficulty in getting the best paint to thinner ratio mixture for use in the airbrush. Some suggest 60% paint to 40% thinner, and others mention a 50-50 ratio. Both of these had their problems with too watery or too thick, and the results were inconsistent. The paint would sometimes initially splatter and then smooth out. Other times it was smooth at first and then splattered. Many of the airbrush clips show this occurring at various times. Only when the compressor pressure was raised from about 20 to 22 psi to about 26 psi did this remedy the problems. This paint was allowed to cure for a day. Then, masking for our fourth color to delineate the zones that the gloss black will be applied to is situated. The area surrounding the vertical tail is protected, including the rudder, which will remain white. Before we can continue, the nose radome needs to be painted, as part of the black we'll be adding shortly actually covers a portion of the top of that radome. All the surrounding territory of the two cockpits is now masked off. The edges of the wing panels are hit with some yellow. Little details, little details. Looking at images of the VMAQ-2 Prowlers, there are some variances in the paint schemes. One difference is that some intake leading edges are highlighted in black, which is a nice feature we'll adopt. Spray gloss coat is added to the entire fuselage to seal in the paintwork and shield it from the upcoming surface washes, as well as provide a smooth finish for the decal applications. One thing that I neglected to add to my checklist of things to do was to fill in these gaps that aren't used for our older model Prowler version. Putty is added, and then touch-up painting is performed. Let's tend to the glasswork. At first, the forward cockpit windscreen was masked and then airbrushed, and then the light lenses were colored in while leaving them on the sprue to prevent their accidental loss. The cockpit transparencies are molded into 2 halves each, which necessitates the need to paint the frames first or risk breaking the glue between the pieces while masking and removing the tape if electing to paint the edges later on. However, if they're painted first, there is the problem that something may go wrong while bonding them from the glue affecting the paint. In this case, the parts were joined and then just hand brushed with the black. Just a quick note, there is an error in the instructions concerning these segments. The F1 section is incorrectly referred to as F2. These are some quick cuts of the handiwork, but the forward canopy glass clip is a little out of focus. Both wing navigation lights are carefully glued in while looking for the best placement. Moving on to the flight control surfaces that haven't been worked yet, steps to catch up to the rest of the fuselage's progress are set in motion. Some of the simpler build portions were actually completed earlier, but they are presented here to keep overall continuity in the video of the project's evolution. The use of the AK 3rd generation paints here on the stabilizers during this period was one in which my ability to lock down the correct paint and thinner ratio and the correct air pressure hadn't been solved yet, so you may see some uneven flow paint application that has to be continually adjusted for better coverage. There are 2 sets of trailing flaps, although the ones with extended actuator arms are not mentioned in the instructions. Utilizing the flaps with these extensions allow for a more interesting display once this aircraft model is completed. Collecting all the parts together, they can be painted in short order, starting with the areas that need the insignia white, which mostly looks like plain old white to me. The regions that need red are prepared with masking tape to protect the first color already laid down. The inner sides of the spoiler flaps have a red edge, much like the landing gear doors, which is a nice little feature that can be added for accuracy. Also, the insides of the speed brakes are sprayed red, as well as the insides of the leading edge flaps. Another advantage of using the trailing edge flaps with the extended actuator arms is that it will add some color to our exhibit, as more of the red zone on the forward part of the flight control surfaces will be exposed. There are a few elements that are worth accenting with a wash on the spoilers and the trailing flaps, and while we're doing that, we'll hit the top of the leading edge flaps with the gold gray paint. There is a moderate number of decals to apply to the Prowler. Let's get warmed up and start off with something easy, the national insignia on the wings and the triple balls on the trailing flaps. There are two areas of big concern worth addressing. First, this guide is deceptive in that the actual scaling we're working with does not match between the illustration and the actual model, particularly on the sides of the fuselage. It indicates we have reasonable spaces between the leading edge of the stabilizers and the Marines lettering, the lettering to the national insignia, and the space between the insignia and the back of the wing root. The gaps are actually much smaller than diagrammed. It's very tight fitting, and I'm glad I checked all this out before starting. The blue tape strip was added to mark where the edge of the stabilizer was for reference in placing the decal closest to it. It was worked out on both sides of the fuselage, but with little tolerance.
Emissions of enemy radars are picked up at long range by the sensitive surveillance receivers in the tail fin pod.
The other big concern at this stage was adding the large lettering Charlie Yankee decals for the Cherry Point, North Carolina base tail code. These letters had to be maneuvered over two large fairings on each side of the vertical tail without tearing the decals while keeping them aligned and also preventing wrinkles. The iconic bunny profile adds nicely to the tail flash while also providing some color with that red square border. Some of the many decals are put on view in these subclips to give a taste of the work involved in placing them, aligning them, and setting them with Mark Fit solution. Now that we've already gained some experience placing these decals on the left fuselage, we should have an easier time applying the same decals to the right fuselage. The horizontal stabilizers also get a dressing of walkway warning pattern decals. While the left side letters was a single piece, the right side comes in two pieces. Although the little segment on the C looks off because of the angle in this shot, it's actually nicely arranged. The overspray coverings are removed to continue our efforts. It's satisfying to see the cockpits again in relation to the rest of the work that has been accomplished since they were buttoned up. The same wash concoction we've been using from the beginning of this project is brushed on, focusing on the panel lines, rivets, screw heads, and any depressions to accent those features. Subsequently, these areas are then wiped down, leaving our solution within all the crevices and other indentations. As always, the removal of the wash does not have to be exacting if one is looking to add that realistic used appearance. In the past, I usually applied the wash, then the decals in case the weathering didn't go as planned. However, this time around with plenty of gloss coat layers on the jet, there was enough confidence to add the decals first, then the wash. The attachment points for the main gear to the base are not all that robust. Some care when moving the model around should always be considered from now on. For display purposes, we'll leave the forward main gear doors open. For our loadout configuration, we'll add 3 ECM pods, one on the centerline with 2 others being wing mounted. We'll attach 2 300-gallon external fuel tanks to the wings as well. These are easy to put together, and we'll set up our final display looking like the jet is ready for some long-range, heavy-duty jamming action. There is some sanding to do to remove the seam lines on all of these payload items. While we do that, let's listen to a few Naval Aviation crew members talk about the Prowler.
Knowing that the EA-6B is along, even in the practice problems that we run on a day-to-day basis for training, gives us all an increased feeling of confidence. See, the airplane is tremendously capable. It does the job that it was designed to do, does it extremely well. I'm very glad they're on our side.
The overall objective is to put this airplane and its capabilities in position with the strike group in order to afford maximum protection for our strike aircraft going in and out, so that we have maximum effectiveness, minimum losses.
We know we've done our job when we launch out on a strike with 12 or 15 aircraft, and we come back and we still have 12 or 15 aircraft.
Now that the main construction of the equipment is complete, it's time to start painting away. These corrugated side panels on the pods have various colors shown in different pictures. A gray is chosen in this instance. Images of the AN ALQ-99 pods sometimes show a lower forward panel as white, sometimes manila, and sometimes as black. To create a sense that fully mission-capable status available units from the pod shop are being used rather than trying to be aesthetically uniform, we'll paint one of the wing ECM pods with a manila-colored nose panel and the other wing pod with the panel black. There are lots of decals required on the wing-mounted ECM pods. However, the pods have identical markings on both sides of the respective pod. To save time, only the decals being applied on the left sides are shown in the video. You'll be able to see the right sides here and there later on as we work on the model. There are only a few decals for the external fuel tanks to worry about.
A pilot and 3 electronic countermeasures officers, ECMOs, fly the airplane and operate its jamming system, a third generation of the ALQ-99 that first proved out in Southeast Asia. When our strike force comes within range of enemy defenses, the jammers are activated.
After the decals are applied, a wash is brushed on to highlight the panel lines and screw heads. If you want your pod to look a little dirty and used, you can leave some of the wash behind. And a quick look of our completed electronic countermeasure appliances. Last but not least, we work on the pylons that will carry all our gear, 2 for our fuel tanks and 2 for our countermeasure pods. As we did with the pods and the external tanks, we'll paint NATO black and then insignia white. One of the last steps in getting these ready are to add the sway braces, 2 per pylon assembly. Before we can load up our Prowler for action, the pylons need to be attached so that we can hang the mission packages. Let's roll out 180 degrees. With all that caught up, the horizontal stabilizers and the upper actuators for the speed brakes can go on. The speed brakes, trailing edge flaps, and the spoiler flaps are attached one by one, providing us more detail, color, and symmetry. It's all starting to come together at last, looking like a respectable military aircraft. Even more small and delicate parts are added on. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this model build and you'd like to see more videos in the future, hit the thumbs up icon, as this channel only runs on motivation fueled by your enthusiasm. What do you think?
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
We're coming to the end of this project, and it's time to bring this Prowler in for a trap on the number 3 wire. Meatball, line up, AOA. Meatball, line up, AOA. Arrived alive. Take care, and we'll see you later.